Hey, what's going on, ReFi Nation? I am super excited to drop a conversation with Courtney and Gordon from New Atlantis about how they're using the power of Web3, decentralized science, and engaging an entire academic community of scientists of how to preserve our oceans and restore one of the most precious habitats that are at the risk of catastrophic collapse. The target here is to preserve 30% of the oceans by 2030, and they have pioneered several different technologies, bringing them together into an open platform to incentivize marine protected areas, which are effectively the national parks of the oceans, to actually protect their waters, to deploy the resources required to maintain these as sacred areas in the ocean that aren't being fished, and seeing that this actually is possible with the technology of metagenomics and inviting an academic community of scientists to create predictive models about what actually happens in the increase in biodiversity and carbon sequestration when we don't fish a particular area. There's a lot of new concepts in this episode. It was definitely a catching up to speed for myself. Got John X back as a co-host, which was super fun. And so if you're interested in how Web3 can be applied to spaces outside of the traditional carbon market, looking at oceans particularly as this vast expanse of opportunity, this is an episode that I think you'll enjoy. Gordon and Courtney are experienced and very successful entrepreneurs. They sold their last venture, Smarty Pants, to Unilever, and they've brought a wealth of experience and information with them to this movement and have been a really integral part of our founding community at ReFi DAO. So hope you liked the episode. Thanks for your time, and let us know what you think. Hey, good morning, Gordon. Good to see you, man. How you feeling?
Excellent, and thank you for having us on today.
Our pleasure.
Hey,
Courtney, I'm so grateful to finally meet you. Heard a lot of good things about you. Looks like the sun is shining where you guys are today. Where are y'all calling in from?
It is. We're up in Ojai, California. Super beautiful. It's like an hour and a half north of LA, up in the mountains.
A little mountain valley. It's really pretty.
Lovely.
Oh, cool. I don't actually know Ojai. And John, welcome back, man. Great to have you back on the show. What's the last couple of months been like for you, bro?
It's I feel like I've washed up on the rocks, and now I'm sort of going into regeneration mode. I just got back to London, to my home for, I feel like I haven't been here for more than a few days since summer at least, so it's good to be home.
Awesome, man. Well, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for joining. For those who don't know much about New Atlantis, I'd love to kick off just by rooting the problem domain. I feel like oceans are a kind of vast expanse that some people know little about, but not much. Maybe give us a framing of the problem that you guys are trying to address, Courtney, and how it fits into the bigger picture of climate change and everything else that we're working towards.
It was good to kick off with that vast expanse pun, John. I really appreciate that. So the problem is that obviously oceans play a massive role in so many things in our world. 30 to 60% of the breaths that we breathe come from the ocean. It obviously serves to regulate the weather. It protects our coast from storm damage. It provides many of the resources in the food web that we rely on, but it does not get or has not gotten historically as much attention when it comes to what we think of as ecological collapse, right? We talk a lot about climate change, but there has not been as much attention, although it's starting to shift towards biodiversity collapse. And that gets, even trickier in the ocean because we can't see what's going on below the surface. And so industrialized fishing and warming, acidification, a lot of these things that are happening at a very fast pace in our ocean just hasn't gotten the attention, and therefore also hasn't gotten the funding or the innovation. So it's starting, but that's really kind of how we got here, which is that the oceans play a disproportionate role, but really has not gotten the same amount of attention when it comes to trying to really regenerate and not only arrest what's happening, but turn things around for us.
Absolutely. And I'm curious how you both stumbled on this opportunity. I know you both have recently exited venture at Smarty Pants and have, been active entrepreneurs. Gordon, what was the transition from your time at Smarty Pants? Maybe get a little bit of background there, but how you guys stumbled on this and decided, you know what, this is what we want to dedicate the next chapter of our lives to.
Unsurprisingly, like the catalyst was really Courtney and Courtney's interests. And so Courtney was on the board of a well-known nonprofit called Only One that focused on raising awareness for ocean and ocean-related issues and initiatives. And they worked with some very famous artists in the ocean media field, Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin. And the initial conversations really kind of stemmed around, can we use NFTs to raise money for nonprofits? But kind of sort of quickly realize that's a viable way to go, but it's not really solving the problem. And it's just essentially another fundraising mechanism. And to Courtney's point, the ocean is the largest biome on the planet. The pelagic biome is 1 billion cubic kilometers, so it's really big. But we don't have really great approaches to it at the moment. And as entrepreneurs, we were interested in trying to figure out, is there a way to create a viable, sustainable business model that aligns human prosperity and financial well-being with improvements in the ocean's ecological health? And so Courtney and I have been ideating on that for the last, 14 months or so.
Yeah, really for a year. And listening to and watching a lot of what you guys have been doing. I mean, we've been a member of your DAO and listening to those conversations. And I think we did spend about a year trying to figure out where we could help. There are a lot of places where land-based solutions, you've got a lot of energy there. But it did seem to us that ocean was a place where we might be able to bring some attention. And again, biodiversity. And we do our little dance where I was frustrated, things weren't moving fast enough. And Gordon said, DAOs are this emerging organization structure and this potential of NFT. Then I said, hey, what about MPA? And they said, which are marine protected areas, these national parks of the ocean. And he said, that's interesting, but what if we could lay on top of it an incentive structure? And then, so we sort of do this dance back and forth, which is kind of how we do things until we really started to, I think, hone in on something that looked viable. And then we started building an amazing team of people around us that are, brilliant at what they do. We are changing the chemistry of the ocean. Life is having a hard time. Biomass is not increasing. And the biomass in the ocean itself is a sequester of carbon. So one of the ways that we can solve the carbon issue is by increasing the biomass in the ocean. And that also has all these other benefits. So while we were going through this discovery, marine protected areas, are the good news, which is that there is a way, and there is a scientific consensus around the success of marine protected areas, which are these, national parks. And they're actually working right now on a high seas treaty to create a national park for non-governmental territory, which is a really interesting problem. We were just talking about that yesterday with some folks, but it became clear that that's the right model, right? That if you let the ocean regenerate, it will. And it can happen in 2 years or it can happen in 20, but that's why the UN has set this goal that by 2030, if we can get 30% of the ocean under protection, they think it will regenerate in time to avoid collapse of the food web and a lot of the bad things that we don't want to happen. So that's the good news. The problem with marine protected areas, there is no business model. So the way it works now, those marine protected areas are funded primarily by governments or philanthropy, neither one of which are predictable, right? The markets change and all of a sudden that philanthropy disappears. Governments change hands, different agendas. And while governments are increasingly paying attention to these issues, they're just not moving fast enough. So when we saw the problem, we have about 8% of the ocean currently under protection, but only 2.5% under what would be considered full protection, which is what really allows for the regeneration that we're looking for. The goal is 30% by 2030. So the math gets pretty amazing, right? You're going from 2.5% to 30%. We've got 7 years. And this is the place where I think entrepreneurs can help, which is, we like really complex problems that other people, haven't solved yet. And we're good at building teams. And so we looked at it and thought, I wonder if there's a way for us to create a business model that would change the incentive structure around MPAs and to provide an additional source of funding and to do that in a way that doesn't require the MPAs to take a risk, right? And so the way we do that is by we're putting assets in the water to collect and sequence DNA. That information is shared with those MPAs. It is not our price. This is obviously going to be on a public platform, open source. And it allows them to potentially create the foundation for a biodiversity credit market, which doesn't exist yet. And there's a reason for that. And that's a whole other problem set. But anyway, that's what is compelling about MPAs is they work. That's the good news. The bad news is they don't have a business model yet that will drive the acceleration. And if we can add this incentive layer that Gordon talked about, we think we can make that happen a lot faster. And it's clear to us based on just even a recent conference in Baja, where a lot of the government representatives were there, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for something like this.
Awesome. Super
So that's
cool.
the good news. Yeah.
I have kind of had a couple of brushes with the concept of a marine protected area in my past. I'm really curious what your experiences are navigating the political landscape and, how do these marine protected areas come about? What's the difference between what you called full protection and the alternative? What are the implications of that for how biodiversity and kind of life regenerates, how the ocean regenerates? And maybe even starting out, what forms of protection are actually applied to these particular areas?
So it is tricky to navigate. I mean, it is a complex system. So I'll give you an example. In Baja, they're working right now on a marine protected area that would be one of the largest actually in the world to surround all of Baja. And the goal is 50% of that area would be full protection. And the other 50% would allow for things like artisanal fishing, sport fishing, which in Baja obviously is a big part of their economy. It's really most of these MPAs, what they're focused on is industrialized fishing because that is what is so destructive, right? And also what they found, as you know, within the marine protected area, if you get to full protection, the boundary areas end up being much more productive. So you can actually increase your fishing around those areas. So it's a win all the way around, but there is a dance for sure. And every single country is different because what their priorities are and how much income comes from different kinds of fishing. I mean, the thing I think we've learned, or I've certainly learned, is that the fisher folk are actually some of the best advocates for this because they make their survive, right? This is an existential threat for them. It's not an I guess economic threat that's tied, but do you know what I mean? That for them, this is how they're feeding their families and they're taking at a sustainable level. It's the industrial, and so the industrialized fishing is a threat to them as well, right? And so it is very complex and you have to navigate, but what this is the reality. If you do the incentive design correctly, the conversation gets a lot easier. And so the more that you can create ways for the government to make money along with the NGO, along with the community, along with potentially investors, the conversation just gets easier. And in fact, we've been having these conversations with some folks involved in this High Seas Treaty conversation around biodiversity protection in the oceans. And what all these countries are looking for is pretty modest. They're not trying to ask for a huge amount of money, but they just want to make sure it's fair. That is what they're focused on, right? There's been so much exploitation in a lot of these countries of their resources that I think what they're really trying to do is they want it to be fair and they need the communities to be taken care of. And that's its own kind of complex web as well. But if it were easy, it'd already be.
Yeah. You touched on a key phrase around incentive design. And I went back to the original thought, Gordon, of your guys back and forth around, could you do NFTs to raise money for this or for that? What is the solution to this? How do you create a viable business model for marine protected areas? Courtney, you touched on your guys' methodology, but Gordon, give us a kind of understanding of what New Atlantis is and how it works and some of the core ideas behind it, if you will.
The basic focus of New Atlantis is to really enhance and preserve, enhance, and expand biodiversity and biomass in the oceans. And so what New Atlantis is looking at, and as Courtney alluded to, these marine protected areas, which are necessary for the regeneration of the ocean. We need to get to 30% of the oceans to be fully protected by 2030 if we're really going to plus have sustainable fishing practices in addition to that, if we're going to have healthy oceans for the long term. And so what New Atlantis really does is it looks at using what's called metagenomics, or sometimes often referred to as environmental DNA. eDNA is kind of a broad catch-all term. A lot of time when you hear about it, it's refers to what's called meta barcoding, which is sort of a simplified version of eDNA where it looks for particular genes. What we're doing is called full metagenome analysis. And so we can take a water sample, we can look for DNA that's been shed by various organisms in that water sample and figure out who's living there in what relative abundance. And we can take it a step further and really start to understand the metabolic health of those ecosystems. So we can say, is this ecosystem healthy? Is it trending in the right direction? Is it, are the species that are there, are they doing well? Are they expanding? Do they have a lot of what's called phylogenetic diversity? Meaning, do they have a lot of genes within their populations that can allow them to be highly adaptive to climate change and other sort of stressors in their environment? And by understanding and quantifying the biodiversity within an MPA, we can start to benchmark how well that MPA is doing at protecting and expanding biodiversity. And from that can flow many different sort of benefits. One can be an estimate on how much blue carbon is being sequestered and shuttled to the ocean depths. So how much carbon is living in the biomass itself and how much is actually then being shunted off to sort of long-term sequestration on the seafloor. Another is looking at forecasting the health of the ecosystems themselves. What does it mean for the fisheries? Are they going to be healthy fisheries or are they not going to be healthy fisheries? Are the coral reefs going to maintain their health and so that they can protect the storm, coasts from storm damage? As I think Courtney mentioned, a coral reef can disperse up to 97% of wave energy from a storm. So it's important if you live on a beach and you live in an area where there's monsoons or hurricanes, you want that reef to be healthy because otherwise you can have a big problem when they hit the shore. And so by being able to look at the biodiversity itself, we can sort of make an estimate on how much growth is likely to happen here for what species and what's going on with commercially important species as well. There's a whole sort of side piece of it too, where it's sort of starting to look at the genetic components within the marine ecosystems themselves for different types of organisms that maybe have applications in synthetic biology or in pharma as well. So there's a lot of ways that the quantification of biodiversity can start generating revenues, and those revenues then flow back to the marine protected area and to the investors in the project itself, so that the better the MPA does, the more money the MPA is generating to expand their conservation and protection efforts, and the more money the investors can make along the way.
The thing that's been so challenging, right? We have carbon credits because trees don't move. This has been the big unlock. Right now, there's so much funding going into carbon credits and none into biodiversity because there hasn't been a way to do it, because biodiversity moves, life moves. And so it makes it very hard to get a baseline and then to measure change. And if you can figure out a way to do that by getting a more accurate view of what's going on in these MPAs, there's a massive unlock there. So there's all this funding over here that wants to invest in biodiversity, and there's biodiversity that desperately needs it. But right now, there's no medium of exchange. There's no way to get that flow happening. To do that, you've got to create this basically a record of where we are now and then where those MPAs are going as they improve. And if you can do that, we believe you've got a massive opportunity to change things quickly.
So can you unpack these biodiversity markets a little bit? It seems like one of the main revenue streams would be issuing biodiversity credits that then have to make their way to some demand source, some big buyers in the market. Can you talk a little bit about what early signs you see that there is going to be demand for these credits when they do come online?
And Gordon, I would turn that over to you. I will just say one thing about it, which is I think we are very excited, but we have to tread carefully, and we know that. Like even this comment will get there's going to be a lot of feedback, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, you can't do biodiversity credits. You can't." But that doesn't get us anywhere. We have to try. And the thing that got me so excited about this project in the first place was, and really unlocked for me what Web3 is all about and the potential, is transparency and the opportunity to do something where it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's transparent, we have the opportunity to start somewhere, and we have to start somewhere. We don't have time to wait. So that is what I think is, so promising about it. But we understand that it's not a small thing to try to create a biodiversity credit market. And they do exist locally. Right now, there are MPAs that are issuing biodiversity credits that are local. But the problem is, because they're trying to tie to the specificity of that local MPA, which is the right thing, but you have to figure out how to build a bridge from the local instantiation to a shared economy. And that's really the trick, right? That is the big unlock. And Gordon, I'll let you talk about how we want to try to do that.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different areas where we think that there will be biodiversity opportunities, and I think that they will ultimately roll up into a market that I believe is going to end up being a lot larger than the carbon markets, and I think that that's the case because if you think about like what are the constituent components, like putting aside just the basic ecosystem services of like the stuff that Courtney talked about, where 50% of the world's oxygen and something like 70% of primary production happens in the oceans, right? Like, so we need that to continue to happen. So, but even if you just look at like, all right, fisheries, ecotourism, insurance is going to be a massive one, right? Both for like people wanting to make sure that their hotel doesn't get obliterated because it's on the coast, but even more broadly, when you start looking at like, particularly in the global south that often have nature-based economies, and those economies are getting squeezed because they often owe a lot of debt to the global north. And if you squeeze an ecosystem too hard, you can increase output momentarily, but you're going to end up with a collapse. And so, and if you collapse an ecosystem that a country depends on, you have big problems. You have like collapsed economies, you have depression, you have potential failed states, you have debtors not getting repaid. So there's going to be a big market around sort of preserving and insuring against biodiversity risk. And we already see Swiss Re has started doing that with coral reefs, which is amazing.
Quintana Roo, yeah.
Yeah, which is great. And then, there's also the blue carbon opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunity in sort of coastal blue carbon and mangroves and salt marshes and seagrass and things like that, which is going to be a massive unlock. And a lot of that is very life-driven as well. And then lastly, as I alluded to earlier, there's the genetic component as well. So as synthetic biology and as ocean-based pharma or what they call natural products are developed from genes or clusters of genes that are originated in the ocean, those could be billion-dollar gene clusters themselves right there. So we think that the broad market for biodiversity, I think, is going to end up being much larger in a lot of ways. And the other thing to sort of really point about biodiversity that I think is kind of interesting and I find kind of personally encouraging is that, excess CO2 is basically like a waste product, and it has a price because governments have said that there needs to be a price on it, which is like appropriate and good that we have that. But life is a little different. Life has like intrinsic value and has economic value as well, in terms of the services that it can provide. And so there is like real economic momentum and potential in life-driven markets, as opposed to something that's just got a floor price because there's a regulation in place. So I think that that's kind of the broad sort of cut at like what a biodiversity market looks like. To Courtney's point, like, every piece of nature is unique and precious, and we get that. And in one sense, like nature is non-fungible. But you can't have a market if you just say everything is non-fungible, because you've got no liquidity and you've got nothing nothing to trade against. And so one of the concepts that we look at is, given a unit area of ocean, in our case, what do we think is the max regen potential of that area, and has it achieved that? So if something's at 50% right now, that gives you sort of a lot of headroom to sort of increase the biomass, increase the biodiversity, or whatever it is it's lacking in. And so we think that there are ways to create fungibility without having to say that a piece of ocean in the sort of North, Arctic Sea is the same as something off the coast of Hawaii. They're not the same ecosystems, beyond being marine, but they do have sort of attributes or sort of key components that you can sort of measure, like how well are they doing on these sort of 5 basic pillars in terms of their potential. So from that, you can develop sort of fungibility. And with fungibility, what really comes that we're particularly excited about is starting to look at how do you create bioregional economies, right? Because as you guys know, with carbon projects, each carbon project got to basically have a slush fund in case the forest burns down or whatever it is. So similarly, like you can look at what's called as currents move up and down the coast of the Americas, for example, that's like a range of countries. And those countries have MPAs. And each one of those MPAs, you could imagine creating a bioregional economy where they all contribute into the pool of biocredits, so that if like an oil tanker runs aground in one area and does a lot of damage, they can self-insure across those areas. And that's because of the fungible layer that Courtney was talking about. And so we're very early in this process. And one of the things that, we're very keen on is really like open sourcing this and trying to invite the collective intelligence of the global ocean community to participate. This is a super complicated problem, right? We don't have all the answers. We're building a container to allow people to come and participate. And when they have a good idea that makes sense, they can be rewarded for that process. And not just in a prestige thing, but actually start to make money by contributing data sets and models that help us make better predictive statements.
I'm struck by the symmetries between what you're describing and the Collectivo framework. I don't know how deeply you've dug into that, but they've got these kind of local impact economies. At the moment, they've got food forests and I think reefs that they're protecting in Curacao. But I was just actually talking to Pat Rawson yesterday about this idea of kind of risk mutualization, where you've got kind of swaps between these credits being generated by different food forests in different bioregions, so that if a hurricane comes to Curacao and damages all their food forests, they've got some backup from some other community that's on the other side of the world that didn't experience that kind of weather event. Super cool.
In oceans, it's very cool that it's happening actually at the same time that what they've discovered is that for marine life, you need to create what they call swimways. So they're creating connectivity already. The Eastern Tropical Pacific is this connection, Chile, Argentina, Costa Rica, Mexico, up the coast, because they realize that all the way out to Galapagos, because life needs to move around. It doesn't just stay in this one region. So I think it's cool that and also I think it's so amazing that at the time of all these great challenges, we also are having this incredible unlock of all these scientists and technologists, engineers that are fed up with academia and are looking for a way to contribute right now. They're very frustrated. They've unlocked, they've discovered they have so much knowledge, but nowhere for that knowledge to go. And we, I think, collectively have an opportunity with some of these platforms and incentive design to give people a real reward for contributing great science to solve a really big problem. And that, to me, also, this whole idea around micropubs, and it is so exciting. And you can tell we've now met so many scientists who are so lit up by the opportunity. One of the folks that we work, our lead scientist is one of these people operating in an institute that he likes, but, really wants to be able to be a part of something bigger. And I think it's an exciting time. As much as it's a challenging time, it's also very exciting to see all these minds, I think, get unlocked in this way.
there's this great sort of wealth of talent in the global ocean community that has been somewhat sort of stuck behind academic and other institutions, and they've done amazing work there. But, we now need to start applying things. And, the regenerative finance, the ReFi movement is an incredible opportunity to do incentive design so that we can create economies that are going to align human wealth with ecological well-being. And sort of the bridge between that is increasingly becoming decentralized science, DeSci. And so how do you start to put like these open source, these scientific frameworks so that you can really get like a lot of people collaborating effectively so that you can create meta models that can produce outputs that can then sort of quantify biodiversity, and you align that with economic incentives that are saying, okay, the better the better the oceans do, the more money everybody is making. So I think it's like, I know the news is bad, like the headlines are terrible. But I'm actually like incredibly optimistic too, because, like as Courtney said, enough people are like waking up and going like, this sucks. And like, we don't want to blow up the world, and and we've got something to contribute. And we're now building containers, and not just New Atlantis, but people all around the world are working on trying to build open platforms that allow people to come together and aggregate and collect in DAO type structures where they can actually have an output and can have a material impact on the world around them. I don't know. I just think it's extremely exciting to see the alignment of science, technology, and economics, pointed towards ecological well-being. So I know it's, like I said, bad news, but it's also very, very motivating, I think, for people. So.
Yeah, totally. And it takes founders like you guys taking up this crazy complex web of crises to make it happen. Like, I really do believe that, we need an ecosystem of innovation with thousands of entrepreneurs all over the world trying out different things and seeing what works. And so, yeah, it's been awesome having you guys in the founder circles. It's great seeing you do so well in the DeSci round and across Gitcoin as a whole. I think you guys are like the third top grant across all the 1,200 projects, which is incredible. It just shows that there really is a residing sentiment of confidence in the big picture of what you're doing. I would really enjoy breaking down kind of like the user journey almost to understand the elements of the system that you're building and to look at the core actors. Because in my mind, we have the marine protected area, and I'm thinking like, who owns that? Are there like, who are the people there? Obviously, there's fishermen and the communities around that. But then there's, people who are taking samples of DNA in the ocean and uploading this data set onto some web platform. And then I assume there's something else that happens around, like you guys said, the modeling and the predictions. And then at some point there's like a credit issuance, right? That some corporate ends up buying and retiring to say we're upholding our, climate commitments or our, sustainability goals. Could we talk more from like a systems view of the different actors and like how this works in a linear process?
So for the MPA, you've got usually three actors: the government, there's an NGO typically that's involved that has a long-term relationship with the local community, and then you have the community itself, and then you have New Atlantis, which is putting assets in the water. So we're doing the sampling, but we're going to partner with local scientists, and we're going to partner with the community to actually do sample collection because we think that's an important piece. So they're really invested, and they are actors both in the collection and in the financial benefit, right? So they are involved.
Ask?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask. So you talk about the government. Are most MPAs within exclusive economic zones, or are there also MPAs in the high seas? And how are the ones in the high seas administered?
So that's what they're working on right now. It's actually, I think this is the 5th of 5 meetings, no comment, from the high seas, the UN high seas treaty, right? They've been meeting, and they have gotten to a place where, and this is kind of where we came into the conversation right now, they're wrestling with this question of DNA ownership. And I think they're getting closer to an idea, if they can figure out the rev share, that, hey, let's just agree that these are all shared resources we want to protect. And if there's some discovery, it should benefit everyone, right? So that's kind of where high seas is. for the 250 miles, from your coastline out, that is your government's provenance, they are, you're operating in their dominion. So any discoveries or right, you are subject to their laws and you have to partner with them. And that's important. And, that's why it's important to go to these conferences to make contact, understand their perspective. The good news is, again, I think the tide is turning in the global south. They seem quite motivated to support the Eastern Tropical Pacific Swimway, which really going to be where our first pilot takes place starting next year. So that's where it starts.
Anchoring back to the kind of user flow, you said we've got 3 actors in marine protected areas: the governments, an NGO, and then New Atlantis and the scientific community who are taking these samples. Can you continue on the kind of linear systems flow for us, if that's all right?
Yep, and then their scientist is coordinating with ours. And Gordon, go ahead.
So once we have there's a whole sampling protocol, right? Because you don't just it's not as simple as just throwing a bucket in the water. You have to
constant
make sure
sampling.
It's happening. And we're sampling every 2 weeks, and you've got a sort of temperature, salinity, GIS data, and all that kind of stuff. So, but once we get the raw sequence data, we then run that through what's called a metagenome analysis. And so a genome is the DNA readout of a species or an individual within the species, but we do it at the species level. A metagenome is the aggregate of all the species within a particular water sample. And so that's kind of a snapshot of who's living there and what their relative abundance is. And as I mentioned, we're doing full metagenome analysis. So unlike sort of more traditional eDNA, environmental DNA approaches, which look at what are called marker genes or metabarcoding, where they can only kind of tell you who's there and how many is there, they don't really get a lot of insight into how well are they doing from a health perspective. And so our view is that we, just as in the same way that you go to the doctor for preventative health screenings, we want to start being able to sample metagenomes over time and see what is the metabolic health of these ecosystems. And that becomes that data set, that time series data set becomes sort of the baseline that additional kinds of techniques such as proteomics and metabolomics or multi-omics is sort of the catch-all phrase can be applied so that you can start to do ecological modeling on top of that and really do both what-if questions as well as also start to make forecasts on the actual health and well-being of the ecosystem in question. So that is our New Atlantis's role in this. To get back to your question, is we see ourselves as building the base level container where we built the data lab, cloud data lab pipeline and the metagenome analysis pipeline, and we're building it in a very containerized way using Kubernetes and all the latest and greatest fancy stuff so that people can then, who have models or bioinformatics pipelines of their own, can come and plug into our data sets and into our pipeline and start experimenting and or contributing their own insights. And our meta goal is to create what's called a meta model, where we aggregate a lot of different ways of measuring biodiversity, some of which will be very specific to certain kinds of ecosystems, others of which are sort of more general, but that way you can both take advantage or take into account the locality of someplace and also sort of more general frameworks and start to use that to create a biodiversity credit market or to quantify the biodiversity within that area itself. And we intend to do this in an open, collaborative way. And as Courtney said, it's not going to be perfect, but it's better than nothing. And because there's market mechanisms involved where, if, Courtney has a model that's better than my model, her model might be used more frequently than my model within the meta model, which means that she can get paid a greater percentage of the token mint per run on that. And so you've got this sort of competitive dynamic where people are they're going to want to put their best models forward, because if their model has the best predictive accuracy, it's going to be used more widely. And that's going to essentially become a revenue stream for the people who contribute those models. So you get sort of an upward pressure in terms of quality, and you get a widening of coverage of the models that way. And by doing it in an open way where it's verifiable, and this is a somewhat technical but important point, we are very focused on the data provenance of all of these bioinformatics runs because reproducibility is going to be super important. So we really want to make sure that we have all the parameters sort of well documented and on chain so that people can see that if they ran the same data, the same model against the same data set, they're going to get the same output so that they can have confidence that the model is producing what it says it's producing and no one's sort of messing around with the outputs.
Super interesting. And just to kind of touch on a specific aspect of it, which is once you create this kind of baseline of what's happening in this marine protected area, it's probably degenerating. What are the actual behaviors that people are doing to regenerate and increase the amount of life in this ocean? And then obviously you're continuing to run samples to verify that yes, those behaviors are having an intended impact. But like, what are people doing? Is it, and who's doing it? Like, what are the behaviors that this system is actually incentivizing in the ocean?
I mean, the thing that's so crazy is it's really just about leaving it alone. And that is
Doing
one
nothing.
of the problems right now is that these MPAs, nature, it turns out, like knows what she's doing,
Shocker.
Just leave it alone.
So, but really one of the biggest problems with MPAs right now is enforcement. I just read, I think in the UK, some of the biggest dredging of the seafloor for shrimp comes inside an MPA. Why? Because there's no enforcement. And why is there no enforcement? Because they don't have funding. So this really is the key problem. We've got the tool. The tool is don't do anything. Just stay away.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the ocean will fix it for you, you idiots. Yeah. But we have to make it financially feasible for them, for that to happen. And the good news too is we're only talking about 30%. I mean, actually, we should be jumping up and down. Oh, we only have to leave 30% of the ocean protected and we'll all be good and doing a happy dance. I mean, it seems quite obvious. One thing too that I think will be amazing. You guys mentioned something about corporate, credits, but I think the other big unlock is individuals want to invest. And I think, one of the issues around carbon with these corporate offsets, so much of the negative, there's a lot of control around what gets verified, and that's important, right? But can't we use transparency as a way of validation that would allow us to unlock in a way that is very powerful? I think there are a lot of individuals who would like to invest in ecological restoration instead of giving $20, to a nonprofit. Not to say that nonprofits don't play an amazing role, but if I could buy a bond for my child that in 10 years is going to be worth more, and she gets to see, she can look at an NFT and it's got a longitude, latitude, and we get to go to that place, and she could actually like sit in a boat on top of it and snorkel in this place that she helped protect, and it becomes more valuable over time. That to me, that's the vision, right? That's incredible.
Yeah. I think like little C bonds, put them in their like C piggy bank, right? So that they grow over time. But if I want to just touch on one thing that Courtney said about leaving it alone. She's totally right about that. It's like the ocean has great, what's called phylogenetic diversity, right? So like ocean is actually quite resilient in many ways, and which is good news, right? And one of the things I was just watching some YouTube about a bunch of scientists talking about the efficacy of MPAs. And within the MPAs themselves, they saw typically like a 600% increase in biomass relative to outside of the MPAs, right? So if you just leave it alone, like the species can, and it's, warming is an issue and there are issues. But there's great potential adaptability given the genetic variability in a lot of these species. And if you just leave it alone, there's going to be a high likelihood that the ocean can solve a lot of this for itself. Now, there probably will be cases where, humanity is going to want to intervene or need to intervene to help get things righted. But by and large, if we just protect the areas there, we're going to get a 6x increase in those areas.
We have to account. There are some downward pressures. Look, the whole snow crab, it's fascinating because I think this is one of the first biodiversity stories that has jumped sort of up to public consciousness. Everyone talking about the loss of, 8 billion snow crabs over a period of 2 years, right? And they had to end the fishing season this year. They think it's from warming. So there are issues, there are downward pressures, but the idea is that even with that downward pressure, if you've got protection, it does allow them to only focus on one fight, if that makes sense. And the complexity in the system is fundamental. This is why it's so important. It's not about one species. I think the other thing that we've really sort of been focusing on is it's really about the web. It's not about a hero species. I mean, that doesn't mean we don't all want to save whales, because we do. But the reality is it's about the complexity of the system, because the complexity of the system is what makes it resilient. And we're going to continue to have pressures in warming. No matter how effective we are, that's going to continue, right? And so we have those areas and those systems, those ecosystems need to focus on those problems, not on additional problems like pressure from industrialized fishing or sea mining or some of the other things that are coming at us.
I can absolutely see it. There's obviously, it's rests on a lot of intersecting technologies, but I've been thinking a lot about the future of the impact markets, right? Carbon credits are a form of impact certificate. And I think and hope that it's actually quite soon we'll start seeing these other differentiated impact certificates like biodiversity credits, marine health credit, child's education credits, right? And I think your point, Courtney, about the power of individual consumers and being a real demand source for these kind of more exotic impact certificates early on is a really good one. I'd love to see like impact curators designing a portfolio that I could subscribe to and that has some of these riskier credits, but that may be like really high impact. I would love to know, I was really excited to see the advisors you have, right? Especially the engagement with some real thought leaders and luminaries within the ocean science world. What questions were they asking when you came and you're like, guys, it's a DAO? Like, how did that land? And what were some of the hesitations?
That was the first question.
Yeah. What was that like?
I don't know.
John.
I mean,
so good to have you back, bro.
Gordon, I don't know I'll tell you what my impression was. The first one was, I was shocked at how enthusiastic people were. Honestly, like who are we, right? We're two entrepreneurs, fine, but we're coming out of left field. And I think what we saw very quickly was they're worried, They are closer to the information than we are. And they need things to happen very fast. And so I think we have been really pleasantly surprised by how incredibly eager they are to get involved and watch things, to Gordon's earlier point, watch things happen. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of meetings, a lot of papers, a lot of, but we got to start doing stuff. Things need to start happening. And so I think the overall response has been, how can we help? And now that we've got a much more refined vision, I mean, like we said, we spent a year in the soup, reading, watching, listening, kind of winding our way through to get to a place that we really made sense to us. And once we got there, I think everyone that we've talked to, we've added some, I think pretty incredible folks since then even. And 201, they've all said, it's starting to feel like it could happen. It's very complex, but that to your point, John, this combination of things, both in the scientific fields around metaomics or multi-omics, meeting these cloud data lab opportunity, meeting incentive structure design, meeting the transparency of Web3, we might just pull it off. It's going to be really hard. This is our joke early on. I said our tagline should be New Atlantis, this is hard. But I mean, what else are you going to do, right? Like we're going to fight, and I just think the scientific community has actually been incredibly excited. Our advisors seem pretty eager.
Yeah, I was going to say, John, to your answer to to make a comment on one of your statement earlier. It's like it does rest on a number of our success does rest on a number of technologies, but I would point out that it's not about the New Atlantis team per se. It's about for us to be successful in large matter, the leap of faith that somebody has to make is like, can we build a container that can integrate effectively data sets and models and insights from the larger ocean community?
Can we coordinate?
I think that's And can we coordinate? Can we use like crypto economics as well as like, data engineering and bioinformatics pipelines to create a coordinated system that allows us in an open way to iterate transparently and to move towards like sort of outcomes that we all agree are beneficial, and we have data sets that we can measure it against, right? So this is going to be one of those things where it's like, it'll bump along, but as we start to find our groove, I think we'll eventually sort of hit that like knee in the curve, right? As more and more pieces start to come together. And that's kind of the nature of like collaborative systems that can have the potential to scale exponentially. And this goes to this point about exponential scaling, I think is really the underlying driver of what Courtney was talking about. We've known for, depending on who you want to ask, like anywhere from, 100 plus years to certainly the last 30 or 40 years, that like humanity is having a significant impact on the climate and by extension, nature and biodiversity. And the solutions, in as much as there have been solutions put forward so far by governments, have been not particularly effective in a lot of cases and have scaled linearly at best. But we're starting to hit these like exponential tipping points, and we need to do something faster in order to sort of reverse these curves before they become sort of, really catastrophic. And I think it's an all hands on deck moment. I think there's also a recognition that, that it's not a bad thing to try to align profit motive with ecological benefit, because I think people are seeing, particularly given the state of the global economy, where you got deglobalization, you've got energy shortage, you've got potential food shortage, you've got supply chain disruption, you've got everybody downstream of the dollar has got a lot of inflation that they're dealing with. Programs that are dependent on philanthropy and government subsidies, particularly in the global South, are just not going to get the resources that they need. And so for us to come and say, here's a way that we can align sort of the individual benefits of the actors within the system with the global outcome, then that's worth trying. And people are excited to step up and try to figure out how can we enable a system that can build an economy that can value a healthy ocean.
Yeah, I definitely think we're at a moment where we should not be cutting off any avenues to innovation in climate action. And I think actually, Courtney, I was kind of struck by your point earlier about how MPAs suffer from a lack of enforcement. And it feels like economic value generation, like why would I go take my boats out to stop people dredging the seafloor if it's not a substantial revenue stream for my government? But if this is now a substantial revenue stream for my government, it's like, hey, I got to protect, I've got to protect how we're making our money to fund our public services.
And the insurance business that insures that place, right? There's so many ways to create incentives, not for all those parties, also for industry. The reality is, if you don't create incentives for shippers, they're going to keep striking whales. Like, you have to create either a disincentive or an incentive for them to avoid that whale, which they can, but you need a different system design for sure.
Well, I'm personally super excited to see you guys take your next step. Just be curious to say, like, what is next? What can people expect from you guys around the corner? And for people listening who really resonate with this amazing opportunity that you've crafted, how can people get involved?
First of all, what's so exciting about the Gitcoin grant, and what an incredible process that is, first of all, just a hat tip to them, right? It's an amazing thing to go through, and it has, I think, lit up our Discord in a way that the community has grown quickly, which we love. So first, obviously, an open invitation to join us in the Discord and, join the conversation. And two, just to start thinking and paying attention to the role that ocean plays, in your life, in the life of people you love, and in the oxygen that you're breathing and all the things that we do. Plastics is actually a big part of it. It is a big part of the conversation. It does have real ramifications for life in the ocean. So it seems silly, and I know we talk about this stuff all the time, but using less plastic does matter. But I'll let Gordon finish on, I'm sure, a much more high-minded note.
well, I don't know if it's high-minded or not, but again, I want to thank you guys both for the opportunity to talk about New Atlantis. So like, obviously Courtney and I are very bullish on New Atlantis, and I would love to sort of throw out the challenge and the invitation to the ReFi community in general. So if you people listening out there want to get involved either on sort of the ecological modeling side or the token design side, like we got lots of interesting problems to work with. Yeah. So, and we think that we think this is a one of those areas where, like, as we get people together and they start collaborating, you really can start to see really interesting developments emerge. We've seen it in our own DAO where people in the Discord, people who we don't know have just shown up, and we're now like collaborating effectively with them. So it's like, it is working and it can scale and it does work. And, for those who are wanting to contribute but don't necessarily have a platform to either sort of bring their ecological traits model to market in some way or to apply nature-based currency design in some way, we would love to chat. And if you want to just come and hang for the vibes, it's like we have another thing we say is like, New Atlantis, come for the science, stay for the adventure. We would love for anybody who wants to come and help us develop memes, like if that's a thing, your thing. So we've got open doors, and it's a fun environment, and I can definitely promise it won't be boring. So
before we go though, I just want to tell you guys too, thank you so much for the role that this podcast plays in my life. Gordon and the team laugh because you can always tell when I've listened to one of your podcasts, because I immediately share it to the Discord and I wax lyrical about the vision and why we're all here. And you really do an incredible job, I think, of both enlightening us but also inspiring us. And when the news can be challenging, it really plays an important role. I listened to that Pioneers episode and I called Gordon. I was like, have you listened? You need to listen to this right now. And we need to remember. And she was, and it's just, thank you guys, because it really matters. And, you guys have been an important part of our journey from day one, for sure. So just grateful to you.
Yeah, for sure. You guys crush it, and it's super fun to listen to, and it's uplifting and informative and very inspiring. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So.
Bless you guys. Thank you so much. You're definitely the reason why we're here. I feel very much at home with you both. And great to have you back, John. For those listening, check out New Atlantis on Twitter, New Atlantis DAO, New Atlantis DAO, and on Discord, discord.gg/New Atlantis. That's Gordon and Courtney. Thank you guys, and looking forward to hearing next from you. And we'll see you in a few days, Gordon.
All right. See
you
in
guys.
Brisbane.
Be well.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.